Well, Mmusi Maimane said it had become clear to him that not everyone in the party believed in his vision to diversify the DA. Former Nelson Mandela Bay Mayor and Federal Chair Athol Trollip followed Maimane, announced that he was stepping down too. Trollip recently lost the race for the powerful position of Federal Council Chair to Helen Zille. For some analysis, now we're joined in studio by Angelo Fick, Director at Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute. Great to have you with us, Angelo. So, two things have happened in recent days: the rise of Helen Zille and this report from his own party, commissioned by Mmusi Maimane, basically saying he should step down. If you look at those two, is there one that stands out to you as a push factor that led to today?
It's perhaps also, I think there is the push factor in terms of the change in the leadership and what that signalled, and some of that is signalled in the report itself. But I also suspect it is Mmusi Maimane being outmanoeuvred by forces in his party and being hoisted by his own petard. This is, after all, a commission he asked for, and this committee of three men, Michiel, Ryan Coetzee and Tony Leon, recommended that the leader resign and that there be an early Congress and a new leadership be elected. And so this is in essence, a morass made by Mmusi Maimane for himself.
Yeah, do you think he would have ever commissioned it? If he knew that this would have been the outcome. And did he pick those three people who wrote that report?
Well, this is the problem that one has to face in committee work, and this goes back to, sort of late 1990s. Committee work in various organizations and institutions in this country where, someone who was in white liberal politics in the 80s and 90s said, know the rules and know 5 ways around the rules. And everybody in a political or any other organization knows if you stack the committee with the right people, you can get the outcomes that you want.
Yeah.
And it was fairly clear from that report that the outcomes that we saw today were the outcomes needed. Athol Trollip's own position was seen as superfluous in the report, and there was a recommendation that it be abolished. And so this is organizational change, but the question is this just an organizational crisis for the Democratic Alliance, or is it also a philosophical crisis for liberal politics in South Africa?
Well, let's talk about that. So the report says he is a weak leader, basically. It looks at the losses at the polls or the lack of gaining at the polls. Mmusi Maimane himself basically laying out that he was a transformational leader, but not everybody was behind his vision for the party, that it had to become more open to black voters. If you look at those two different narratives, where do you stand?
Well, the contradiction inside the report is a contradiction that is in the Democratic Alliance, but it's also been a contradiction that as far back as the 1970s, Nobel laureate Nadine Gordimer kind of diagnosed in white liberal politics altogether, which is the question of how do you appeal to the majority and continue to stick to the old. So the interregnum, the old cannot die, the new cannot be born, which many other political parties in this country have been stuck with, is now finally inside the Democratic Alliance. But unlike those other parties, it's also for them a philosophical crisis, and the report uses this term philosophy. So despite all of the, shall we say, collegiality on that podium, and the idea that Helen Zille at the end says that she will remain cordial, underneath that cordial facile surface is actually a deep-seated philosophical difference. And Helen Zille articulated that difference very clearly when she said, as leader, she owns up to having made the mistake of having race as important in and advancing black leadership in the DA. Those tensions are in the report, they're in today's resignation statements, they're in the Democratic Alliance. How they proceed between now and April, when they want to have their conference, and how they make decisions at that conference will indeed, as Tony Leon, Michiel and Ryan Coetzee point out, determine the future of the party beyond 2021. You cannot pretend you live in a country of 58 million people where race does affect people's lives and their perceptions of it, and you are going to have a politics founded in 19th century industrial Victorian England, and somehow you're going to appeal to a post-millennial, post-apartheid electorate to become something other than a niche party, an opposition party, something that is not ever going to have governance outside of regional and or municipal levels. So
let's just be clear, you're talking about her sort of liberal philosophy that leadership should be based on merit and performance. The DA should effectively be racially blind in a sense.
Well, the argument is possibly a little more complex than racially blind, but this idea that you will have how shall one put this, capacity and capability in the absence of redress, and that redress will be done based on capacity, and that certain things will never be questioned as being capacity. And so this kind of idea that those who are the beneficiaries of colonialism and apartheid come only with those benefits and do not come with any lack whatsoever, and those who are the survivors of colonialism and apartheid are nothing but lack and will have to be brought in. That paternalistic politics that the PFP held throughout the 70s and 80s has very little traction for black voters in this day and age. The kinds of capacities that black people bring to politics is often blind or is often erased by a certain gaze inside the DA. And until they deal with that, the paternalism of an Alan Paton-esque vision is not going to come true. One thinks here of J.M. Coetzee's damning indictment. That which is no longer European and not yet African is precisely not just a crisis for white culture and white letters in South Africa. It is the culture for white liberalism in South Africa. It is a report, Leon, Leroux and Coetzee, that is riven with contradictions, where it says it wants to call upon people as individuals, and a page later talks about how Afrikaans and Afrikaner voters must be brought back. It conflates anti-racism with non-racialism. It is the language of men whose politics is stuck in 1970 for a country that wishes to move beyond 1994. And that, I think, is a real challenge for the DA, which the report does not deny. And Mmusi Maimane spoke to that today when, in his parting words, he actually, either by Freudian slip or by psychiatric cabaret, said the DA may no longer be the vehicle for him to pursue, and perhaps others, the vision of one South Africa.
Is this a crisis for Helen Zille? Because she has this liberal vision, you're saying out of step with where South Africa is. Maybe she was coming in, bringing that with her, but suddenly resignations around her. She's seen as the old guard, the white leader trying to come back.
It may not be a crisis, but it's certainly a challenge, because as the person who has to take care of the day-to-day business, the details of that report, the deep sense of mistrust between members, crisis between the federal head office and various structures at provincial and regional level, all of that is stuff that she will have to address. And it is, despite all of the cordial behavior on that podium, I think going to be difficult for her to not become the person on whom this is lumped. She will be seen, her ascendancy on Sunday will be seen as the reason Maimane and others, including Herman Mashaba, has left. And let's not pretend that this is all coherent. In the last 3 days, we have seen people make statements that are entirely at odds with the politics that they profess. You cannot deride conservatism if you are somebody who was once head of the Free Market Foundation. You cannot make the kinds of statements about race and pretend that you're going to be in a party that is beyond race. You cannot say that you're going to be a member of this party's caucus in Parliament and at the same time, at your resignation, say that this party is not the best vehicle to pursue one South Africa. Some of these things do not cohere. And this kind of contradiction used to not be the case for the Democratic Alliance, but has become it precisely because it can't get beyond that signal crisis of its politics being founded in the 1970s and its realities being founded in the 2010s.
So I want to get to that. What sort of long game could Mmusi Maimane be playing? But first, let's take a listen to what Helen Zille had to say when she got up to the podium after those two resignations today.
Our Constitution makes provision for the fact that if a leader departs in unforeseen circumstances, the party chairperson takes over until a new leader can be elected. This is a rather unusual situation because both the leader and the chairperson have taken individual decisions at the same time. So before we rush into something that may not be constitutional and may not be appropriate, we are taking legal advice as to what the right path forward is constitutionally. And tomorrow we will convene a federal executive by teleconference to discuss that legal advice and to chart the way forward. I'm deeply moved by the commitment that both Mmusi and Athol have shown to the values and the vision that we all share that are set out in the first chapter of our Constitution, to which Mmusi, Athol and I have all in different ways made a major contribution. And I know that till our dying day we will work together for one South Africa for all, in a country where the economy can grow and where everybody can be included on the path to prosperity. And the Federal Executive, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of the Federal Council, although I haven't consulted them, says thank you very, very much to both Mmusi and Athol for their contribution, and long may our cooperation and work and your participation in it continue. Thank you.
All right, so you were saying we shouldn't read too much into how cordial things seem today. Simple question. Is the rise of Helen Zille going to decimate the party? It's a while till the polls, but we're hearing from former DA leaders that black leaders inside the party are unhappy. Will black South Africans who wanted to support the party be unhappy?
Well, Helen Zille and various other people in the DA may be very unhappy with the ability of ordinary people to read the record. But the record of black people who've left the party unhappy is not, invisible. If you go back to Lindiwe Mazibuko, you go through the mess of the Patricia de Lille exit, which comes up in the Leon report. You now look at somebody who is saying, Mmusi Maimane, this is the leaving of a leader. You're looking at a variety of people. You've also had disaffected other people in public. The very issue that the report raises around social media conduct. Phumzile van Dam has said that there are forces inside the party who are against the agenda that was brought on by black people. So this division inside the party, which the report by Leroux, Coetzee and Leon talk to, is an issue that Helen Zille is going to have to take on, because it is not just at the senior leadership level. The report indicates that it is throughout the party. So the internal dynamics of a party that has played a particular game for the last 8 or 10 years is now in the public domain. It is left to leader to leave, and the corporate structure that the DA is, and it has kind of triumphed on that corporate structure and said it is the best way to work, has failed today, because Helen Zille has had to indicate they don't know who the current leader, the leadership takeover process will be, precisely because they could never have. That's entirely up to them. This is a question that the DA is best placed to answer. But my concern for the DA would be, how are they going to get beyond this? Because this cannot be that Helen Zille returns, and with her a swathe of people who have left because they were unhappy with the trajectory of the party over the last 8 years will return with her, because that takes them back to 2010 or 2008. And that might be a good time for them. But in 2019, 2020, 2021, South Africa is in a different place, and you can never go back.
Let's talk about the contradiction now. So Mmusi Maimane said this party may not be the vehicle for my vision, so I step down as leader. But he's not stepping down as an MP or the leader of caucus, the DA caucus in Parliament. What could he be playing at? The FF Plus earlier told us that he's probably waiting till April, till that Congress, maybe to see if he could become a leader in a stronger position. Could that be possible?
Well, that is possible, but then why resign now when you could use your leadership position to strengthen your position? And the fact that he's resigned is an indication that he couldn't strengthen his position as leader of the party. He had done the spectacular thing of calling for a report investigating the post-electoral position of the DA, which damns him very much. He, let's not forget that his record is also a record of spectacular missteps. The fight with Helen Zille about colonialism and its meanings in South Africa was not a face-saving moment. It is part of that record of indecisive, dithering decision-making processes that the report accuses Mmusi Maimane of. Yeah. And the report's details, I think, are quite damning, because it is an investigation of DA members, officials and staff members, and their views of the leadership. And that, I think, should say very much.
Well, does that report convince you that he was a weak leader in some respects?
The report does not convince me on very much, because I think the report speaks in and about the language of the 1970s. It really struck me when reading it that it could have been written in 1979 about the PFP. It's as if we weren't living in 2019 South Africa, that the gaze of the writers of the report was very clear in the report that they were stuck inside a particular vision where race and blackness was about diversity, that they didn't seem to indicate that they lived in a majority black country, that they felt that they could not let go of the old, that they wanted to win voters back who were clearly disaffected with them, and it swung to the right. Do they imagine that the party should swing to the right, and in doing so would continue to call on greater and greater sections of the South African population that had rejected repeatedly in election after election that kind of rightward swing ethno-nationalist politics? It abjures those politics and yet at the same time reinvents those terms. The fact that they think inside the Population Registration Act group categories of 1950, unable to move beyond a party that had once been led by a woman who says repeatedly and reiterates her role in Steve Biko's death reportage, tells me that this is a party that's not just in organizational disarray, that they're actually at philosophical loose ends, that they actually don't know what it is they want and how to get there, and do so in a country in which they cannot pretend that race doesn't play a role.
All right, I've got time for one more question. So Mmusi Maimane does have a nexus around him, people who've left in the last few days. Herman Mashaba, James Self, Athol Trollip, although he says he's leaving politics. But if not April, and if he doesn't emerge as a DA leader, do you see some sort of breakaway? Do you see some sort of new party emerging in the future?
If he does start a new party, it would be very short-sighted, because if you split the DA's vote, both of those organizations become completely irrelevant in the longer term. The last thing that any politician in the Democratic Alliance would want is copification or Ahang SA. It must, it says in the report, it will learn from the National Party and the new National Party. It must also learn from COPE and from Ahang SA that it does not founder between elections, and by 2021, which it says it's aware of, it could become a non-player in the South African landscape. And that, I think, is the real risk if they do not chart their territory or their trajectory through the territory ahead carefully, and do not, in trying to get back people who've left in disaffection, alienate people that they could have gathered to them in these processes.
All right, thank you very much. So the DA looking for direction, even looking for a new leader, because the Constitution says the federal chair should step in. He resigned today as well. That was Angelo Fick, director at Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute.